Gentlemen, my name is Landon. You are watching episode 3 of Savage with Mercy. I want to thank everybody so much for tuning in today. I don't know if you saw the Savage with Mercy Instagram story a couple days ago. I posted a screenshot of a podcast that I'm listening to, specifically the PBD podcast. The host is Patrick Bet-David. It's his interview with Andrew Tate. I find Andrew Tate a very fascinating individual, very controversial individual, of course, but he's fascinating. I think there's a lot to be learned from him, whether you agree with him or not, whether you agree with anyone or not. I think there's something to be learned from them if they have a unique perspective and they're someone of conviction. They truly believe in what they're saying, what they're doing. At least they appear to be, right? This is a almost 5 hour long interview. This episode or this podcast with Patrick Bet-David and Andrew Tate. So much of what most of you have seen of Andrew Tate is in YouTube shorts or reels, right? So it's in clips of 30 seconds or less, a minute or less, right? So many of those are taken out of context. They're just making a blatant point, and that could be someone supporting Andrew Tate. That particular clip could be someone supporting him, and that could also be someone trying to portray him as a force for evil, negativity, whatever. But I would highly recommend that everyone go listen to this interview. Again, that's on the PBD podcast, Patrick Bet-David's podcast. Shoot, I want to say it's from last September, something like that. Late summer of 2022 that it was recorded. But it's almost 5 hours long. And if you really want to get to know somebody, and I'm not saying that he's being completely honest in that entire 5 hour conversation, but that's a good way to get to know how someone wants to be portrayed, how someone really believes. And I'm about 3.5 hours into it. I've been just listening to bits and pieces here and there during workouts and so forth. And I got to say, I haven't really heard anything. I haven't really heard him say anything yet in this interview that I've disagreed with. Yeah, maybe a couple things here and there, but nothing major. The vast majority of what he says, I tend to agree with. So, something to think about. I might talk about him more or bring on somebody on the podcast here and talk about him a little bit more, but I want to finish this interview. He's done multiple other interviews that I want to look at as well and look for the consistencies. And so, I don't know. It bothers me to see someone like him. Well, let me put it this way. The people that are hating him so much and that are trying so hard to make him look bad, these are people that I do not trust at all. And they're also the people that are trying to make him look bad are people that I do not support their convictions or the agendas and narratives that they're trying to push. And so that makes me curious. So, yeah, check out his interviews. I highly recommend it. Please make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube channel at Savage with Mercy. And then, of course, are you following us on Instagram at Savage with Mercy? I need to be a little more active on there than I have been. Of course, we post up there whenever I post on there, whenever a new episode drops and all that sort of thing. So feel free to follow me there. Feel free to follow my personal page as well. It's just my name, at Landon Wietrich. Not very original. But anyway, and I am in the process of getting the podcast on Rumble. There's just one video up there right now. You can look for us there, Savage with Mercy. And we get other videos up there as well. So if you like Rumble, it's a little bit more freedom friendly. Feel free to check us out on Rumble. Anyway, today's topics. I'm not yet sure what I'm going to title this episode. I've got a couple different ideas. But I'm going to be covering 4 key topics in this episode. Just look at my notes here. So I'm going to start off with talking about the significance of identity. And then I'm going to move into developing your identity before marriage and kids. Then I'm going to talk about a spectrum. This is a concept, we'll call it. Well, this is a concept that I have come up with. It's a spectrum of selfishness on one end and a loss of identity on the other. Okay? And then lastly, we're going to talk about maintaining your identity after marriage. All right? Now, why I wanted to talk about this is because I'm a thinker. That's partially why I have a podcast, is because I'm a thinker. And Jordan Peterson talks about speaking is really thinking out loud, right? It's just expressing your thoughts. This whole concept of the significance of identity and why it matters and how it's unique to every individual and so forth, which is what we're going to get into today. It's something that I've been thinking about because I look at my own life, how I want to be a better man for my wife and for my children. I look at my flaws and I look at my insecurities, and all of that stems from what I believe about myself, which is my identity. Your identity is really what you believe about yourself, and we're going to talk about that more here in a minute. And so I've been really considering, what beliefs do I need to change about myself? What parts of my identity do I like? What parts do I not like? So there's a lot of questions that I've been asking myself lately. So everything we're going to talk about today is based on my own thoughts, my own challenges, but then it's also what I've observed in other men. Okay? So starting off with the significance of identity. I just mentioned Jordan Peterson. I'm going to bring him up again here. I was watching a little video of, it was basically like a little speech or snippet of Jordan Peterson talking, and he was talking about our identity being a functional identity. And he says we act out this identity in the world. So his point being, you don't just say, oh, I identify as this, or this is my identity. It's not something that you can just claim or state. It's something that we act out in the world. I've also heard Jordan Peterson say, people would ask him like what he believed when it came to like Christianity or religion and so forth, and he really pointed out that I can't remember the specifics of everything that he said, but said something to the extent of, don't necessarily ask for someone to tell you what they believe. Look at what they're doing. Their actions will tell you what they believe. And again, that's like what I touched on earlier. I've been considering that myself. Like I've been observing my own actions, and what does that say about my belief? Or if I'm going around and claiming to others, I believe that X, Y, Z is true and this is not true, etc., do my actions reflect that? So going back to this, our identity is what we act out into the world. And it's unique to each and every one of us. Your identity is unique to you. And it's something that I don't think all of us, so let me look at myself here. I won't say all of us. I'll just talk about myself for a second. I'll use myself as an example. For a very long time, I didn't understand the significance of identity and how I needed to establish my own. It is very easy to be a follower, to do what you're told, to merely follow the agendas and narratives of the content that you consume, whether that's, stuff online, whether that's what you're just told by your parents. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying these are all different voices, different things that we are consuming, things that we are hearing, things that we are observing or watching, the actions of others, the examples that we see. But we need to be intentional about that which we consume, because it will affect what we believe, and that will shape our identity. And the identity is so powerful with it being there. Like we each have we each have an identity, and that's the only identity, where there's only one of us. And there will be no one else that can replicate the impact that we have on the world, or the way that we love our wives and our children, the way that we perform at work or make money, etc. So you could even say your identity is what makes you valuable. And I need to be careful when I say that, because I don't mean to say, like, if you don't think very highly of yourself, or if you don't have much of an identity, that makes you less valuable. I'm just saying, whatever makes you unique, you're a human being. You have value, and so therefore, develop that which makes you unique. Invest in it, whether that's time, whether that's money. Invest in your identity. Spend some time thinking about yourself. On the previous episode with Eric, I had mentioned the listener that emailed me, and he asked a question about essentially what should you do if you look around and all of your friends are getting married and they seem to be kind of moving on in their life, and you kind of seem to be stuck to where you are, and you're not ready. You're not in a position to take that step because it requires two people, to get married and everything, and feeling a little left out or feeling behind. And you're really you're longing for that next step, that step of marriage and starting a family and everything, but you're not quite in that position. And how should he feel about that? He was just asking me about that. And what I said on the podcast, I did email him back, by the way. What I said on the podcast with Eric is really, in response to him, was you need to take this time to really invest in yourself and find out who you can be for a wife and children. That's not something you want to have to figure out after marriage, and that's what we're going to talk about that here later today. So, yeah, belief will dictate your identity, and as I mentioned earlier, you don't want your identity to be developed by someone else. Like I said, if you're just a follower, and that's the comfortable position to be in, where you're just doing what your peers do, what your friends do, or even just following what your parents do. And my parents taught me wonderful things, but I think it would be doing them a disservice if I just mimicked everything that they did. I need to take what they gave me and go beyond that, grow from that. And some of us are real trailblazers. That wasn't me when I was younger, to just go be adventurous and go kind of figure things out on my own. I've become more that way now in my, late 20s and now early 30s. But it is more difficult to be more of an independent thinker, try things on your own, do things that no one else around you is doing. That's difficult. But that's when you really learn about yourself. And it's a beautiful thing to really discover who you are when you test yourself in certain ways, you push yourself, push boundaries, and see how you respond in certain scenarios. That's when you really learn about yourself. And there's so much beauty in that discovery. There's power in that discovery. And there's so much growth that comes from that. And there's so much confidence to be gained because you're gaining awareness. And that answers so many questions. You now know what you would do in this kind of situation. You now know that you like this or you don't like that. The last thing I want to talk about in this section as far as the significance identity is how it influences your standards. I talked in the very first episode of Savage with Mercy about how having low self-esteem or little self-respect, you set the bar low for your life. You just have lower expectations and therefore lower standards. And I truly believe that your identity, so that stems from that. As far as your identity really sets the standards of your life. For example, I'm late to a lot of places. Being late is part of my identity. And so my standard just is continually being late. Even if I say, I really want to be on time, I really want to be early, my identity is still being late. So therefore, I set the standard of, and it's a subconscious thing, right? Nobody sets the standard. Well, like, yeah, I'm gonna leave at the last minute, or I'm gonna leave a couple minutes late. It's a subconscious thing, and so many of our standards are set subconsciously. So, and that's what I'm referring to. I'm not saying like we're deliberately. Sometimes we do. Sometimes we do deliberately set lower standards just to make it easy on ourselves or whatever. But a lot of our standards are set subconsciously. And if we're aware of that, we can realize how that can be very dangerous. If you're identifying a certain way, if your identity involves something that's negative, if you're not intentional about the standards that you're setting, or not intentional about fixing that negative part of your identity, you're going to have negative standards. I should have brought a whiteboard over here, and I did think about it, but it seemed like a little bit of a hassle. But I wrote out that, well, I'll read you this note. And I'm a visual person, so I wrote down this 5-step, I don't know if we'll call it a process or a concept or whatever. I'm a visual person, so I had to kind of write it out. Hopefully, this will make enough sense if I just, verbally share this with you. And it all comes from how identity influences your standards. So I'm going to read this to you if I can find the note here on my sheet here. Here we go. Belief dictates the identity, which sets the standards, which drives the actions, which produce the results. So I was doing some thinking as far as what makes us act a certain way. And again, I'm a thinker. I like to find where different attributes or different things, how they influence one another, and I see what the root of it is, and I try to see where it goes. Hopefully I didn't lose everybody. So let me repeat this again. So I think what started this concept was I was thinking about identity and standards. But I realize that ultimately it begins with what you believe in, like I was saying earlier. So it starts with what you believe in. That dictates your identity, the way that you look at yourself and what you truly believe about yourself. So belief dictates your identity, which sets the standards, which drives the actions. So your standards drive your actions. They determine what you're going to do about what you believe. And those actions are what produce the results. So it all begins with belief on one end and results on the other. So your results stem from your belief. And when I say results, that could be really results in any endeavor in life, in any area of life. It all begins with what you believe. And all that to say is that's just the relation between your identity and standards, and really how it all comes back to belief. Moving on to the second topic here, developing identity before marriage and kids. So, while you are single, and I don't mean to be a broken record, because I already talked about this a little bit, is that's the critical time to become the man that it's the time to become the man that you want your wife to have. Who do you truly want to be for your wife and children? It is far easier to develop your identity before your marriage because it's just you. You have more time. You you might have more money. You might not. But you're going to have more time to truly invest in yourself, whether that's traveling, spending time with certain individuals that you can learn from, certain mentors or whatever, experiencing different things, reading books, really investing in yourself. So if you are single and you're preparing for marriage means working on yourself. And again, I know I talked about this in the last episode, but I wanted to spend a little bit more time on that and expand on that a little bit. So yes, it is far easier before you're married to develop your identity, and that's really the best way to truly prepare. Now, and that's like, what does that mean? Again, it's about finding it. Just what I talked about earlier, as far as the significance of identity, with pushing different boundaries and testing yourself in certain scenarios, really learning about yourself and developing that awareness of what makes you unique and what do you want out of life. What standards do you want to have? What do you believe? So it all kind of stems to those. It goes back from what I was talking about earlier. It's deciding what you believe and what kind of standards you want for your life. And that will result, well, that will help you become the man that you truly want to offer your wife. And also, that will play a role in the woman that you attract. Really. If you're not feeling like you're getting the attention from the right kind of women, maybe it has to do with the women that it's more about the women that you're attracting, or maybe the women that you think that you're, or the quality of woman that you would like to have. If they seem very much out of your league, that's a better way to put it. If they seem out of your league, out of your class, and you're maybe even intimidated by them a little bit. You know, Jordan Peterson this is not an episode about Jordan Peterson, but his stuff keeps popping into my head. He talks about like how so many men are extremely intimidated. They're petrified of women. But that's where I go back to the way that you invest in yourself and the standards that you set for yourself. That will play a huge role in the type of woman that you're going to attract, the type of woman that you're going to be worthy of. So now let's talk about that spectrum that I referred to at the beginning. And this is a concept that I came up with because when I was younger, I don't know, we'll say early teens or whatever, early to mid-teens, I would see these older guys that were, 3 to 5 years older than me. These were the guys that I looked up to, right? They were in shape, they were athletic, they had cool hair, cool clothes. The real suave guys that I idolized. Well, they'd get married. This is something I observed. They'd get married, and a couple years would go by, and I'd see them again, and they'd have bags under their eyes. They'd have a gut. Their hair was not styled anymore. And I was like, it's just totally different guy. I was like, bro, what happened? And I'm not saying that happened every time with every scenario, every guy, but that happens. And there's multiple factors that can bring about that kind of result, right? But I can't help but wonder if some of those guys lost their identity a little bit after marriage, or they did not develop their identity prior to marriage, and after they got married, it is a lot harder to work on yourself, to work on your own identity, and they gave up, basically. This is my life now. There's really no reason to self-improve. I'm already married. It's 10 times harder when the kids come along. So this spectrum, selfishness on one end and a loss of identity on the other. I talked about this a little bit in a dad's group that I was in a couple years ago. And we kind of went around and we talked about, where are you on the spectrum? All these different dads. Do you lean towards the end of selfishness, or do you lean towards the end of having a loss of your identity? And let me just paint more of a picture around this spectrum. So I'll use myself as an example again here. I am more on the end of selfishness. That's not intentionally. That's just that's just where I'm at. I tend to think of myself and my own needs first, and that's something that I need to work on. Now, so I think that's all the soul searching and stuff that I've done post-marriage and post-kids, that in some way, me being more on the selfishness end, that has helped that a little bit. However, I also believe that the soul searching and everything that I've done after marriage and children is because I've realized my flaws. I've realized my if you wanna find out your flaws, get married and have kids. That's all I'll say. And I just realized how inadequate I was, and I realized that I wanted to be more than what I was. And so I really started having these conversations with other people and reading and just really spending some time thinking and really analyzing what beliefs do I need to change and what do I need to do better? What do I need to grow? So you could say that end of selfishness, for me, it has some negatives, but there's also some healthy parts of it. Now let's look at the loss of identity side of thing. I am worried that a lot of guys, maybe they had an identity, a strong identity, strong beliefs, strong convictions, whatever, prior to marriage, but then after they got married, everything changed, which it does. Not everything, but a lot of things change after marriage, and especially when kids come along, it changes tenfold. At that point, you realize, well, I don't have the time to do the things that I did before. I don't have the energy to do the things I did before. My money now has to be spent on diapers and food and mortgage and that kind of stuff. And it can be easy to really throw out your entire self for your family. And sometimes that narrative is almost portrayed as a good thing. I was going to say in the church, maybe not just in the church, but I disagree. You absolutely do need to sacrifice parts of yourself for your family. Yes, I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is your family needs you, the best version of you, which means they need your unique, strong, developed identity. And I talked about this in a very early episode of the Inquire Inside podcast when I was talking about boundaries, I think it was. If you drain yourself of who you are, like basically empty your cup and everyone else, and you don't refill, you don't recharge, you're not going to be any good for anybody else. I'm getting off track here a little bit, so let's come back to this whole loss of identity. So I don't want you to do that. I don't want you to lose your identity. It's like, oh, so now my identity is just my wife and my kids. Of course, they're a significant part of your identity, but in order to truly be the man they need you to be, you need to still have your own identity. And I'm going to leave that more up to you as far as what that means, as far as your identity, but just more on the surface, I'll just kind of say keeping it more high level. Again, I'll go back to that's really the attributes that make you unique, the things that bring you joy. Make sure you're still investing in those things, investing in yourself, in your own. Like the very, very first episode of this podcast, really investing in your own health, with that, especially physical health and mental health. But then, both my wife and I, we need times where we just take breaks. I try to give my wife her time away. She gives my time away, whether that's working out or doing something that we enjoy by ourselves, and that's the time to recharge and really focus on ourselves and our own identity. So where do you fall on that spectrum? Do you find yourself do you feel like you have zero time to yourself? Is there really nothing in your life that's truly yours anymore? Like there's no endeavors that you have or individual personal goals that you're pursuing anymore after marriage and kids? Is that you? Do you feel like your life is just paying bills and being a husband and a father? And now, if I will say, if you're very fulfilled and all that, you're probably in a good place as far as your identity and how developed it is and stuff. But that's not going to be a place of real joy and real conviction and effectiveness. A place where you are just drained and your identity is just your wife and your kids and your job, and you really have nothing to call your own. nothing to claim. So ask yourself that. Where do you fall on that spectrum? And are you okay with where you're at on that spectrum? Or do you need to go the other direction a little bit? Whether that's towards selfishness a little bit more. You've never heard that before, have you? Or whether that's towards, or maybe it's towards more self-sacrifice. Because going back to those guys that I would observe, just my fear was that they had truly lost whatever identity they had before. So, moving on to the last topic of the last section of this episode. Let's say if you have not developed your identity prior to marriage, yes, it still can be developed after marriage, but it's going to take a lot more intentional effort. There's going to have to be a lot more. You're going to have to really set aside some time. Like, this is the time that I'm going to spend reading these books or meeting with these other men or, going on this trip, whatever. And for some guys that they get married at 19 or really early 20s, man, I'm not really jumping up and down when I see those guys get married, because I don't even know, have they really discovered who they are as a man yet? Have they taken that time? Are they truly going to be the best version of themselves that they can for their wife? Now, you're never going to be perfect. And there's never like a perfect moment to get married. So if you keep waiting for that day is never going to come. But I'm just saying, take the necessary time. Some guys might be absolutely ready to get married at 20 years old, 19, 20 years old. Most of us are not. I sure wasn't. If you have developed a strong identity prior to marriage, regardless of how strong it is, your identity will shift, and it should shift after marriage and children. It did for me. And just with my own experience, I would say I am very grateful that I got married when I did. I don't think I should have waited longer or anything like that. But what I'm trying to say is I think we should always be growing, right? And there was definitely some significant changes that I've gone through since marriage. And like I said, I really think that was due to getting married and having kids. And you guys have heard me talk about this on previous episodes. But there was a lot that I developed prior to marriage, but there's also a lot that I developed post, after marriage. And that's absolutely okay, but at minimum, you're going to need to shift your identity a little bit, because now you're going to have to incorporate the wife and the children. There are guys out there that they don't make that shift at all. They think they can still maintain the identity that they had prior to marriage. And that can be they're still okay with having friends that are girls. That can be they still think they can play video games all the time. Still go hang out at the bar with their friends on Saturday nights. And some of this is opinion, but like, I think you've got no business having friends that are girls after you're married. Is there a time for something like video games, or even like a drink with your friends? There's maybe a time for that, but it can't be a weekly kind of thing. I don't want to tell anybody else how to live their life, but just use some common sense. Look at what you're responsible for, and really communicate with your wife as far as what her expectations are, and truly be aware of her needs. I mean, because if you're okay with her going out and hanging out with her friends every weekend and stuff, even after kids, and I know parents that, maybe not every, I've seen parents do this kind of stuff, and I don't want to sit here and judge about it, but I also want to say I don't agree with it. And so ultimately make that decision for yourself, but that's not something that I would find very respectable, is someone who is still taking those kinds of liberties after marriage, because your identity needs a shift. You're a husband and a father now. It's time to be an adult. Get with the game. So yes, the identity needs a shift, but then we also need to work on maintaining an identity. like I talked about in episode 1 of Savage with Mercy, I really started working out diligently back in 2013. And I didn't get married then until 2018. And that's something that I've continued to do ever since. And so that's a part of my identity that has never changed. If it just continued to grow and develop, because that's an area that I realized was only going to help me be a better husband and a father. And now that I'm sitting here talking to everyone, I'm trying to think. I don't think there's necessarily anything that I changed too dramatically, like totally discarded. Like after children, for sure. I've definitely discarded a lot of screen time since I've been married. My wife's probably gonna laugh if she hears me say that, but I promise you, I have discarded. I used to spend a lot of time watching movies or Netflix. Used to go to movies a lot and so forth. And yeah, it's been a long time since I've been to a movie, and it's not very easy for me to watch movies anymore. So those kinds of things are things that I throw out. I don't, I don't hang out with friends as much as I used to. And that can be detrimental. That's something that I highly encourage, is still maintain relationships. I would encourage relationships with other married men if you're married. Not a great idea to have a bunch of single guy friends if you're married. And if you disagree with me on that, talk to me about it later. But this might be a good topic for a future episode, is that I do believe it is very critical. It's very valuable for husbands and fathers to still have a strong group of brothers, friends that they're very close to. And I have that. We don't spend time with each other in person very frequently, but we do communicate on a regular basis, and that's very helpful. You need that support group. You need that group of brothers that you can run things by, and you can encourage them. They can encourage you, and all that. So just to summarize, if you're single, now is the time to develop your unique beliefs, your unique identity. Your identity is you acting out your beliefs. And then if you are married, if you haven't developed your identity prior to marriage, do what you can to develop it now, to really learn about yourself. And then, of course, like I said, your identity will shift after marriage, but it still needs to be maintained. It's not healthy. You're not doing anyone any favors if you lose your identity altogether, and you're just a warm body in the house making money and babysitting the kids, helping your wife out with the kids and mowing the yard. That's not the man that you need. You could be so much more than that for your wife and your children. Continually invest in yourself after marriage, maintaining that identity, developing new skills, honing your current skills. That's just going to keep you sharper. There's really nothing that keeps me personally more energized and feeling more alive than progress. If I am working on something, this podcast, to be perfectly honest, like selfishly, this podcast is part of that. It's something that I can build, that I can really work on, invest in. It takes a lot of time. Editing these things, ask my wife. And now I try to do it like at night when the kids are all in bed and so forth, but it's rewarding because it's work that produces results. It's something that I'm working on, I'm investing in, something that I hopefully am getting better and better at. And the gym is the same way. It's something that I'm investing in and seeing results from. I'm building something, I'm improving upon. So bring those things into your life and invest the necessary time and effort into them. But that's all I had today. Thank you guys for tuning in to episode 3 of Savage with Mercy. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Like I said, you can look us up now on Rumble as well, Savage with Mercy. Follow our Instagram page at Savage with Mercy. And then, of course, you can always email the show if you have feedback, positive or negative. Or if you have topic suggestions, I'd love to hear them. That email address is stillstandingmedia@gmail.com. But yes, thank you all so much for listening. Catch you guys next time.